There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a forest when the temperature drops below the point where life is comfortable. It isn't a peaceful silence. It is a heavy, pressing weight. Tonight, we are not just observing history, we are stepping into a winter that does not ask for permission to enter. It is a winter that presses down from a sleek gray sky, settles deep into the marrow of your bones, and simply refuses to leave. You are standing outside. The snow under your boots doesn't crunch, it squeaks. That high-pitched, dry sound is the Earth's way of telling you that the cold has already won. The wind here doesn't blow around you, it cuts right through your wool and leather, as if they were made of gauze, treating your clothing as a suggestion rather than a barrier. If you stay up here, standing upright and exposed to the elements, you likely won't survive the night. The air is too hostile, the wind too thieving. But look down. Somewhere nearby, the ground itself feels different. It radiates a faint, almost imperceptible memory of summer. The earth feels warmer than the air, and you realize, with a clarity born of necessity, that if you want to see the spring, you cannot stay up here. You have to go down. You have to lower yourself into the earth, just as thousands of families across medieval Europe did when the long winter arrived with no intention of showing mercy. Medieval winter was not merely a season, it was a siege, and to survive a siege, you do not stand on the ramparts, you retreat to the keep. In this case, the keep is the soil itself. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to dim the lights. Let your eyes adjust to the shadows. Stay exactly where you are, because you are about to engage in an act of ancient survival. You are about to lower yourself into the ground. You feel the cold first in your feet. It is an insidious, creeping numbness that drains upward through the thin leather soles of your shoes. It stiffens your toes, then your ankles, locking your joints with a frost that feels like iron. Up here, above the ground, everything leaks heat. The wind steals it, the stone walls of the church steal it. Even the thick timbers of the Lord's hall sigh and exhale their warmth into the dark. But down below, the rules of physics change. The earth is a miser. It holds on to what it has. You kneel. You press a bare palm against the frozen soil, and you notice something strange, something that defies the logic of the air above. The ground is not biting back. It is quiet. It is patient. It is waiting. This decision to dig is not a dramatic choice made in a panic. It is a coldly practical one. It is a decision based on the one mainstream fact that stood firm across all of medieval Europe, from the peasant to the scholar. Soil acts as insulation. A layer of earth buffers the temperature, slowing the loss of heat in winter and the gain of heat in summer. You don't need a physics degree to understand this. You feel it the moment your shoulders dip below ground level. The wind fades. The howling gale becomes a distant, muffled rumor. The noise of the storm softens. Your breath, which was steaming violently in the open air, calms down. You start digging not because there is any romance in it, but because there is no romance left in freezing to death. The hole grows wider, then deeper. Your hands ache, your back complains, but you keep going because winter preparation is not a single heroic afternoon. It is weeks of labor as the daylight shrinks. Historians often describe this not as a desperate last resort, but as a seasonal rhythm. Families expected to change their entire mode of existence as the cold approached. The ground was not an emergency shelter, it was part of the calendar. There is a quirky detail about this history that always surprises modern listeners. In some regions, especially across parts of Northern and Eastern Europe, families didn't dig new holes every year. They reused older pits year after year, generation after generation. They would carefully reline them with fresh timber or wattle, treating these pits not as random holes, but as inherited spaces. The winter home your hands are shaping now may have sheltered your grandparents. That knowledge steadies you as much as the warmth does. You lower yourself fully inside. The ceiling is low, deliberately so. The walls curve slightly inward. This is not a basement under a house. This is the house. This is semi-subterranean living, half buried, half built. It was a common enough strategy that archaeologists today still find the scars these dwellings left in the soil across the continent. These sunken dwellings operate on a simple principle: reduce the surface area exposed to the cold air. It's a small advantage, perhaps only a few degrees, but when survival balances on the edge of hypothermia, a few degrees is the difference between life and death. You listen. Above you, the wind howls, tearing at the trees. But down here, it is just a suggestion. Sound travels differently through packed earth. Storms feel muffled, as if the whole world has been wrapped in a heavy blanket. The silence isn't empty. It is heavy, comforting. It is the kind of silence that lets your shoulders drop for the first time in days. Then there is the smoke. Of course there is smoke. Fire is life, and in a confined space, life produces byproducts. In many of these underground or semi-buried homes, the smoke from the central hearth did not rush eagerly outside through a chimney. Chimneys were a luxury, a complex piece of technology not found in a peasant's winter pit. Instead, the smoke lingered. It pooled near the ceiling, creating a smoggy layer that you learned to live beneath. It seeped slowly through vents or the thatch roof. Your eyes sting faintly, a constant low-level irritation. Your clothes absorb the smell until you become part of the smoke yourself. This is the price of warmth. There is a fringe detail from period accounts that hints at a strange adaptation. People grew so accustomed to this smoky, thick air that the clear, biting winter air outside felt sharper and unpleasant in comparison. Imagine preferring the sting of wood smoke to the purity of a winter morning, because the smoke meant safety. Imagine preferring the haze to the clarity, because clarity meant cold. You sit near the hearth. The heat is uneven, your face burns while your back remains cool, but it is real. Fire warms bodies, but the earth warms the space. That distinction matters. You feel the warmth settle in the room instead of racing upward and away. The ground cradles the heat, refusing to let it go too quickly. This is why you are here. Historians still argue about whether underground living was primarily driven by the climate or by economic necessity. Some suggest that poorer families simply had fewer materials for above-ground insulation, making the earth the cheapest solution. Others point out that even communities with access to timber chose semi-subterranean designs when the winters were particularly harsh. You feel that debate quietly in the background as you rub your hands together. The cold does not care about your income or your social standing. It only cares about exposure, and here you are less exposed. You notice another shift. Your breathing slows. The frantic edge of survival dulls. Above ground, the cold keeps you alert in the worst way. It sharpens fear, keeps the adrenaline spiking. Down here, You can rest. That might be the most important survival factor of all. Exhaustion kills as efficiently as frostbite, and medieval winters were long. Sleep mattered. The ceiling presses close. You have to stoop to move around. This is not claustrophobia, it is containment. Space shrinks because heat expands. Smaller rooms are easier to warm. Families crowd together, not just out of affection, but because bodies are radiators. You feel another presence nearby, a shoulder, a knee. This is the shared heat of survival. There is a faint dampness in the air, the smell of wet soil. Earth breathes moisture. You smell it, that deep mineral scent. Moisture is both an ally and a threat. It keeps the air from becoming painfully dry, which protects your lungs, but it invites mold and rot if unmanaged. Medieval families knew this intimately. Even if they didn't use the word humidity, they understood the balance. They aired out the spaces when the weather allowed. They burned herbs like rosemary or juniper to mask the smell and perhaps cleanse the air. They scraped the walls. These were small acts of control in an environment that rarely offered any. Above you, the snow piles higher. You know this because the sound changes again. Footsteps vanish. The world grows quieter. Underground, you are no longer fighting winter directly. You are letting the planet do the work for you. There is a quiet, almost humorous realization that sneaks in as you sit there. The ground doesn't care who you are, lord or peasant, young or old. The earth offers the exact same insulation value to everyone. In that sense, underground living is radically equal. Later, castles will loom above the frozen landscapes, their stone halls colder than the pits below. But we will come back to that contrast. For now, focus on the present. Your fingers regain feeling. Your breath steadies. The winter outside still rages, but it feels farther away, as if you have stepped sideways out of its reach. You did not defeat the cold, you simply moved to where it has less power. This is the first lesson the earth teaches you. Survival is not always about standing firm. Sometimes it is about lowering yourself, listening, letting gravity help. You lean back against the packed soil wall. You feel its steady coolness. It isn't warm like a body, but it isn't freezing like the stone outside. You understand why families chose this path again and again. You stay where you are because once you have felt the difference, it is hard to imagine choosing otherwise. The earth around you behaves like a stubborn guardian, slowing every attempt the cold makes to reach you. This is the quiet secret medieval families relied on. Soil resists change. It remembers yesterday's warmth and releases it reluctantly. Above ground, winter works quickly. The wind strips heat from walls in seconds. Frost creeps into cracks in minutes. But down here, temperature changes move at a glacial pace. One widely accepted historical fact is that underground and semi-subterranean spaces maintain a stable temperature year-round, often hovering just above freezing even during brutal cold spells. That difference, small as it sounds, is the line between shivering constantly and surviving with dignity. You press your palm against the wall again. It absorbs your body heat slowly, spreading it outward rather than snatching it away. This is insulation without effort. No weaving, no quarrying, just depth. The smell down here is distinct. Earth, smoke, old wood, damp straw. It settles into your clothes and hair. People of the time likely smelled like this for months on end. Travelers from the south often noted that winter villagers carried the scent of the soil with them even when they were outdoors, a smell that outsiders found unsettling, but locals barely noticed. Scent becomes part of identity when you live half inside the ground. You adjust the bedding beneath you, straw, reeds, maybe dried leaves. Nothing luxurious, but everything is chosen for its ability to trap air. Insulation is not only in the walls, it is in the layers. You pile what you can between your body and the floor, because even friendly earth will draw warmth away if you lie directly against it for too long. Historians still debate how intentional these insulation strategies were. Some argue that families understood the principles instinctively, learned through generations of trial and error. Others suggest that survival practices spread through imitation rather than theoretical understanding. You copy what worked for your neighbors because they lived through last winter. That is reason enough. You listen again. The silence feels thick, padded. Snow absorbs sound above. Earth absorbs it below. Between the two, noise has nowhere to travel. Storms become distant murmurs. This silence has a psychological effect. Fear softens. Time stretches. Nights feel longer but less frantic. That matters when darkness lasts 16 hours and there is nowhere else to go. There is a faint drip somewhere. Moisture from breath, from soil, from life itself. Underground warmth is always negotiated. Too dry and throats ache. Too damp and sickness creeps in. Medieval families learned to manage this balance with remarkable sensitivity. They repositioned fires. They opened vents briefly during calmer weather. They hung fabrics where condensation formed. Small adjustments that made the difference between endurance and misery. You shift closer to the hearth. Firelight dances against earthen walls, throwing shadows that feel closer than shadows above ground ever do. This space responds to light differently. There are no long corridors for darkness to hide in. Everything is immediate. This closeness breeds awareness. You know where everyone is. You hear every movement. Privacy is sacrificed for warmth. There is a fringe tidbit that tends to surprise modern listeners. In some regions, families deliberately plastered earthen walls with mixtures that included straw, clay, and sometimes even animal dung, not because they enjoyed the idea, but because these mixtures sealed cracks and added insulation. Dung, when dried and mixed properly, reduces airflow and retains heat. It smells far less than you expect once cured. Remember this detail. It will echo later when we talk about livestock sharing the living space. You breathe slowly. Smoke curls upward, then spreads, trapped beneath the low ceiling. Your eyes water briefly. This is not comfortable in a modern sense, but it is survivable. Smoke keeps insects away. It dries the air slightly. It carries heat across the room. Chimneys will come later. For now, smoke is part of the system. Historians still argue whether underground living significantly reduced winter mortality or merely delayed it. Records are incomplete. Parish deaths spike in cold months regardless of housing type. Yet personal letters and settlement patterns suggest families actively sought underground shelter during the worst winters. You do not need statistics to understand why. You feel safer here. That feeling alone is powerful. The earth above you presses down with weight measured in tons. Strangely, this pressure comforts rather than frightens. It seals you off from the wind, from drifting snow, from sudden temperature drops. You imagine the ground like a thick blanket pulled over the village, heavy but protective. You stretch your legs. Space is limited but manageable. Everything here serves a purpose. There is no room for excess. This simplicity sharpens attention. You notice how warmth pools near the center of the room and fades towards the corners. You learn where to sit, where to sleep, where not to linger too long. Time passes differently underground. Without windows, light becomes ritual. Fire signals evening. Embers signal night. You begin to measure hours by temperature changes rather than clocks. When the air cools slightly, someone feeds the fire. When it warms too much, someone shifts the bedding. This constant micro-adjustment keeps the environment stable. You think briefly of above-ground houses, tall walls, drafty doors, roofs rattling under snow. Romantic in illustration, brutal in reality. Earth doesn't rattle, it absorbs. This is the second lesson the ground offers you. Stability matters more than comfort. Warmth doesn't need to be dramatic, it needs to be steady. Medieval families understood this deeply. They trusted the earth to do what air could not. You settle again, letting your back rest against soil that hasn't seen daylight in years. It feels ancient, patient, reliable. Winter continues its assault above, but down here, the earth slows it to a crawl. You are not warm, you are warm enough. And in a medieval winter, that difference is everything. You begin to notice something subtle as the days blur together beneath the soil. This place does not feel new, it feels remembered, as if the ground itself has hosted lives before yours and quietly expects more to come. The idea is oddly comforting. You are not inventing survival from scratch. You are stepping into a pattern worn smooth by centuries of repetition. Long before medieval winters earned their reputation, people had already learned a simple truth through experience. Digging down works. Evidence scattered across Europe shows shallow pit dwellings appearing again and again across vastly different eras. From early Iron Age settlements to late medieval villages, the shape returns with minor adjustments, not because of nostalgia, but because it functioned when nothing else did. You run your fingers along the wall and imagine earlier hands doing the same. Generations before you pressed clay into cracks, replaced rotting posts, packed soil tighter each winter. The knowledge was not written down in manuals. It traveled through memory, through watching, through the unspoken rule that when the cold deepens, you follow what endured last year. There is a strange continuity here. The earth does not care which century you belong to. It offers the same protection now as it did to someone crouched here 500 years earlier. That realization settles slowly, like warmth seeping into your bones. Some archaeologists suggest these underground choices were less about innovation and more about remembering older ways of living. When above-ground houses failed under extreme cold, communities did not invent solutions, they returned to them. You feel that pull now, the instinct to lower yourself, to reduce exposure, to trust gravity rather than fight it. You shift your weight, and the packed floor creaks faintly. Wood beams overhead support soil, not sky. The difference matters. Snow piling above does not strain the structure the way it would a roof. Weight presses evenly, stabilizing rather than threatening collapse. This design appears again and again in excavated sites, suggesting it was not accidental. There is an odd detail that surfaces when you look closely at these older dwellings. Many were not fully underground, but sunk just enough to take advantage of thermal stability while still allowing light and smoke to escape. This half measure feels deliberate, a compromise between darkness and warmth. You are not hiding underground, you are nesting within it. You picture earlier winters, perhaps harsher than this one. The so-called medieval warm period did not erase cold seasons. Winters still bit hard, especially in northern regions. When weather patterns shifted unpredictably, people leaned on solutions that did not depend on forests staying intact or stone being affordable. Earth was always available. There is no full agreement among historians on whether these designs spread through migration or independent rediscovery. Did families copy neighbors, or did necessity push them toward the same conclusions again and again? Sitting here, the answer feels irrelevant. When cold strips options away, solutions converge. You adjust the fire again. Embers glow softly. Light reflects off curved walls, giving the room a rounded, almost womb-like feel. This shape is not coincidence. Corners leak heat, curves hold it. Even if medieval builders never articulated that principle, their homes quietly followed it. You feel time stretch. Outside, daylight comes and goes without your direct awareness. Underground, the rhythm changes. Morning is marked by colder air before the fire wakes fully. Evening arrives as warmth settles deeper into the room. Your body begins to sync with this slower cycle. There is a quiet psychological shift that happens when you live like this. Above ground, winter feels aggressive. Down here, it feels distant. Present, yes, but less personal. The earth absorbs the season's anger, leaving you with its residue rather than its full force. Some scholars point out that these older dwelling styles often reappeared during periods of crisis, harsh winters, crop failures, population pressure. When resources thinned, people simplified. Underground living stripped life back to essentials: shelter, heat, proximity. You become acutely aware of sound. Every movement is amplified in the small space. A cough, a shift of straw, the crackle of fire. This constant awareness pulls people closer emotionally as well as physically. Privacy is sacrificed for warmth. There is a fringe tidbit that tends to surprise modern listeners. In some regions, families deliberately plastered earthen walls with mixtures that included straw, clay, and sometimes even animal dung, not because they enjoyed the idea, but because these mixtures sealed cracks and added insulation. Dung, when dried and mixed properly, reduces airflow and retains heat. It smells far less than you expect once cured. Remember this detail. It will echo later when we talk about livestock sharing living space. You breathe slowly. Smoke curls upward, then spreads, trapped beneath the low ceiling. Your eyes water briefly. This is not comfortable in a modern sense, but it is survivable. Smoke keeps insects away, dries the air slightly, and carries heat across the room. Chimneys will come later. For now, smoke is part of the system. Historians still argue whether underground living significantly reduced winter mortality or merely delayed it. Records are incomplete. Parish deaths spike in cold months regardless of housing type. Yet personal letters and settlement patterns suggest families actively sought underground shelter during the worst winters.
You do not need statistics to understand why. You feel safer here. That feeling alone is powerful. You hear them before you see them. It's a soft, rhythmic shifting in the shadows, the scrape of a hoof against hard-packed earth, the heavy, wet sound of slow breathing. In the dim light of the embers, you make out the shapes of the other inhabitants of this underground world. They are not human, but they are just as essential to your survival. In the corner, separated only by a low wattle fence or perhaps a shallow drainage ditch, stands a cow. Beside her, a few goats huddled together, maybe a pig sleeping deeply in a pile of straw. Underground, warmth is a currency that is never wasted, and living bodies, large metabolic engines, produce more of it than a fire ever could on its own. When the medieval winter tightened its grip until trees cracked in the forest above, the boundary between human space and animal space dissolved. This was not done out of sentimentality, it was done out of physics.
The heat radiating from a 1,000-pound animal is unmistakable. It is a slow, steady presence that fills the room without the need for fuel or tending. A cow is a living furnace. A goat is a small radiator. When you sit near them, you feel their warmth seep through the layers of your wool and linen, reaching your skin. It is a gentle reminder that survival is a shared enterprise. In many cold regions of medieval Europe, from the Scottish Highlands to the steppes of the East, bringing livestock indoors or underground was standard practice during the harshest months. Archaeological layouts make this clear. Dwellings were often designed with shallow channels or barriers that marked zones rather than walls. The separation was practical, not absolute. You shift your position slightly, making room. The animal beside you exhales, a long, dusty sigh. Its breath plumes in the cool air, mixing with the smoke and the breath of your family. The air feels thick, heavy with the scent of hay, manure, wood smoke, and unwashed wool. To modern sensibilities, this smell might seem unbearable, but to you, right now, it smells like safety. It is strong, pungent, and alive. It signals that the systems of life are still functioning. The animals are eating, the animals are breathing, therefore you are safe. This proximity creates a soundscape that becomes the soundtrack of your winter. It is noisy, it is inconvenient, but it works. The animal's body heat raises the ambient temperature of the enclosed space, sometimes by several critical degrees. That difference matters when the cold outside presses relentlessly from every direction, seeking a way in. You notice how the air near the animals feels less sharp, less eager to steal the warmth from your own body. There is a small, easily overlooked detail hidden in old winter routines regarding this arrangement. Animals were often fed more generously during deep cold, not just to keep them healthy, but to stoke their internal fires. More digestion meant more warmth released into the room. The household became a single, living biological system. Each part fed the others. You hear the slow, rhythmic sound of chewing. It becomes background noise, as familiar as the crackle of the fire or the breathing of your children. Children grow up with these sounds. They learn early that animals are not distant resources to be managed from afar. They are winter companions. You watch a child sleeping near the partition, unbothered by the shifting of a goat or the lowing of a cow. They have adapted. Their resilience is strong, forged in this shared space. But survival is not just about heat, it is about fuel. And for the medieval peasant, Fuel meant food. You look toward the back of the dwelling, past the sleeping family and the resting animals, to the recesses carved into the earth. Underground living turns your home into a root cellar. This is not an accident. It is one of the primary reasons you are here. You reach toward a bundle wrapped in rough cloth. Dried roots, carrots, turnips, beets, pulled from the ground before the frost could ruin them, now return to the ground to be preserved. They feel leathery but intact. They smell faintly sweet, tinged with the scent of the soil that cradles them. Underground temperatures hover in that perfect magical range, cold enough to slow down rot, but warm enough to prevent freezing. If these vegetables were stored above ground in a drafty shed, they would freeze solid, their cells bursting and turning to mush upon thawing. Here, they wait. You realize that underground storage makes winter survivable not because it creates abundance, but because it stretches scarcity into something manageable. You see the grain bins packed tightly and lined with clay to keep out moisture. You see the salted meat hanging near the ceiling, where the smoke is thickest. The smoke acts as a preservative, sealing the surface of the meat and discouraging flies or pests. Every element of the underground home serves multiple purposes. The smoke that irritates your eyes saves your food. The earth that dirties your floor saves your heat. There is a comfort in being able to see your food supply. Anxiety eases when you can look at the physical evidence of your preparation. Above ground, stores might freeze, spoil, or be stolen. Underground, they remain stable. You check them daily, not to eat, but to listen. You listen for the shift of grain, the softening of a turnip. You become attuned to the microscopic changes in your pantry. Spoilage makes a sound if you listen closely enough. This constant auditing of resources creates a mindset of extreme restraint. You finish your portion of food and carefully rewrap what remains. The bundle returns to its niche. The wall closes around it visually. The smell of the food fades back into the general scent of the room. Nothing is wasted. Portions are measured by need, not desire. Underground life encourages a discipline that feels less like a rule and more like a law of nature. Now, let your mind wander upward through the timber beams and the layers of soil and snow to the world above. Picture the castle on the hill, the stone fortress that dominates the landscape. We often imagine the lords and ladies in their high towers as the masters of winter, living in luxury while the peasants burrow like animals. But the thermal reality was often the opposite. Stone is a traitor in winter. It absorbs cold eagerly and releases it reluctantly. A great stone hall with its soaring ceilings and vast fireplaces acts as a massive heat sink. You imagine the lord bundled in furs, pacing the floor to keep his blood moving, while servants feed logs into a cavernous fireplace that roars but fails to heat the air more than a few feet away. The heat rushes upward, lost in the rafters, while the cold radiates from the stone walls like a physical force. In the castle, tapestries hang thick on the walls not just for decoration, but in a desperate attempt to stop the drafts. Servants shiver in the corridors. Water freezes in the ewers overnight. The prestige of the castle, its height, its size, its stone, becomes its liability in January. Winter punishes grandeur. Down here, in the humble pit house, the physics are in your favor. You are warm, you are not impressive, but you are comfortable enough to sleep without shivering. There is a strange historical irony in that realization. Status built upward,
survival built downward. You feel a strange sense of satisfaction in that realization. You possess a comfort that the wealthy cannot buy, because it requires a humility they cannot afford. The earth does not reward ambition, it rewards adaptation. This reality shaped the social structure of winter. Underground living flattened hierarchies. Everyone who produced heat mattered. The warmth of a servant was as valuable as the warmth of a master. In the close quarters of the pit house, social distance was impossible to maintain. You sit shoulder to shoulder with your family, your neighbors, perhaps even people you owe money to or have argued with. There is no room for pacing, no corner to storm off to. Disagreements in an underground home must be resolved or endured. Avoidance is impossible. This enforced closeness sharpened social skills out of necessity. You learn to read the mood of the room instantly. You learn when to speak and when to stay silent. You learn to notice when someone is agitated before they snap. Underground living turned families into tight, cohesive units. Not always happy, perhaps, but functional. You couldn't afford the energy of conflict. You notice how tasks are shared. Mending, cooking, tool repair, everything happens in full view of everyone else. There is no privacy to hide laziness, but there is also no privacy to hide struggle. If someone is sick, everyone knows. If someone is weak, everyone sees. Care becomes communal because the health of one affects the survival of all. A cough in a confined space is everyone's problem.
There is a debate among historians about the health impacts of this life. The smoke, the damp, the proximity. Surely disease spread faster. Yes, but care also arrived faster. No one suffered unnoticed in the dark. A fever was tended to immediately. A shivering child was pulled into a warm embrace instantly. Underground living made vulnerability visible, and in doing so, it ensured that help was never far away. As the night deepens, the atmosphere in the room shifts again. It is time for stories. In a world without books, without light to read by, the oral tradition is not just entertainment, it is the library of survival. You listen as an elder begins to speak. The voice is low, rhythmic, tuned to the acoustics of the earthen chamber. Words don't bounce off stone here. They sink into the soil, feeling intimate and grounded. They tell stories of past winters, the great frost of 40 years ago, the famine that followed the wet summer, the wolves that came too close. These are not just idle tales, they are instructions. They contain the data of survival encoded in narrative. Children listening in the dark learn what to do when the food runs low, how to spot the signs of a collapsing roof, which wood burns hottest when green. They learn history not as a list of kings and dates, but as a manual for enduring the cold. You watch the faces of the listeners in the flickering firelight. The shadows exaggerate their expressions. Fear, amusement, awe, everything is magnified. The underground room becomes a theater of memory. In this space, the past feels incredibly close. The ancestors who dug these pits, who sat in this same spot, feel present. You are part of a long chain of people who looked at the frozen world and decided the safest place was within the earth. Religion, too, adapts to the underground. The grand cathedrals above might be freezing, the stone floors painful to kneel on. But down here, faith feels different. It becomes personal, domestic. You see a small cross scratched into the clay wall near the door. It isn't a grand work of art. It is a mark of protection, placed by a thumb pressing into wet earth. Families whisper prayers together in the dark. The rituals are stripped of pomp and circumstance, reduced to their core, a plea for safety, a thanksgiving for warmth. God is believed to be everywhere, even beneath the roots of the trees. You feel the hours stretch. Time is elastic here. Without the sun to mark the passage of the day, you rely on the rhythm of the body. You sleep when you are tired. You eat when you are hungry. You wake when the cold nudges you or the fire needs wood. This decoupling from the strict time of the church bells or the sun can feel disorienting at first, but then it becomes liberating. You are existing in deep time, the rhythm of the earth itself. But even the earth has its limits. As winter drags on, the air can grow stale. The dampness can become aggressive. You notice a patch of wall that stays wet, a beam that feels spongy to the touch. This is the danger of the underground, the slow rot. You have to be vigilant. You watch as someone takes a spade and carefully scrapes away a layer of mold from the wall, tossing the spoil into the fire. It is a small act of maintenance, but a vital one. The house is alive, and it needs tending. Eventually, you sense a change. It is not something you see, but something you feel. The air from the entrance smells different. It carries a scent that isn't smoke or snow. It smells of wet bark, of mud, of change. Spring does not arrive in the underground house with a burst of light. It arrives as a drip. The snow above begins to melt, and the earth, frozen for so long, begins to soften. This is the most dangerous time. A frozen roof is stable. A melting one is heavy. Water seeks a way in. You watch a bead of water travel down a wooden post, then another. The transition out of the earth is as careful as the descent into it. You do not simply burst out. You emerge cautiously. You have been protected by the soil, but now the soil is changing state. It is becoming heavy, wet, and unpredictable. You stand at the entrance, pushing aside the heavy hide or woven door. The light is blinding. Even a gray, overcast spring day feels dazzling after months of firelight and shadow. You squint, your eyes watering. The world above looks different than you remember. It is vast, open, and shockingly bright. The trees are black skeletons against the sky. The snow is receding, revealing the flattened brown grass. You step out. Your legs feel strange on the flat ground, unaccustomed to the open space. You take a breath of fresh air. It is thin, cold, and clean. So clean it almost hurts your lungs after the thick, smoky atmosphere of the pit. You cough, clearing the winter from your chest. Looking back at your home, it looks remarkably small, just a mound of earth, a low roofline barely visible in the landscape. It seems impossible that your entire world fit inside that small space for so long. It looks humble, almost invisible, yet it saved you. You see your neighbors emerging from their own burrows, blinking like waking bears. There's a shared look between you, a nod of recognition. You have all passed through the same trial. You have all been held by the earth. The social bonds forged in the dark do not dissolve in the sunlight. They change, but they remain. You know who sat closest to the fire. You know who shared their food. You know who told the best stories. The cycle begins again. The underground home will now be cleaned, aired out, perhaps repaired, and then left to rest. It will wait. The summer will come, the crops will grow, and life will expand upward and outward. But the pit remains. It is a constant reminder that winter will return, and when it does, the earth will be waiting to take you back. You walk away from the dwelling, your boots sinking into the mud of early spring. You feel lighter, yet grounded. You carry the memory of the underground with you, the smell of the smoke, the feel of the packed earth, the sound of the low voices. You understand now that living underground was not an act of defeat. It was an act of profound adaptation. It was the smartest thing you could do. The boring truth of history is often the most critical. Survival isn't about battles or glory. It is about staying warm. It is about staying fed. It is about enduring. And sometimes the best way to endure is to dig. Now, as the video ends, you can turn the lights back up. You are back in the modern world with your central heating and your electric lights. But take a moment to feel the floor beneath your feet. It separates you from the earth, but the earth is still there, deep below, holding its temperature, waiting. It hasn't changed. And if the lights ever went out and the winter grew cold enough, you might find yourself looking at a shovel and looking at the ground and understanding exactly what to do.